Company towns are commonplace in American history. It's a town built by a company to facilitate production of perhaps a mill, a factory, or in the case of Sunrise, Wyoming, a mine. Company towns are often isolated from neighbors, making day-to-day life difficult, especially in a time before cars were commonly owned. The company built stores, churches, schools, and even recreational spaces. Development of Sunrise began with the construction of a general store in 1899. Within 3 years, there were 38 homes, a boarding house, a schoolhouse, and a sociological building with a hall and reading room. And at one time, there were nearly 100 houses, 6 duplexes, a hotel, a store, 2 schools, a train depot, a gas station, and a church. And still, there were shortages in housing, which meant a lot of bachelors had to live in crowded conditions, or live in nearby Hartville. In 1917, a YMCA was built, the first in Wyoming, which became the center for cultural activities. A fun evening may have been getting a fresh cut at the barbershop, playing a game of pool or throwing a few strikes at the bowling alley, then grabbing a drink from the soda fountain and heading to the auditorium to watch a movie, a boxing match, or maybe attending a dance. Just down the road from Sunrise is one of the oldest towns in Wyoming, Hartville, which rounded out the needs of Sunrise townsfolk in a number of ways. There were no bars or saloons in Sunrise, so up until 1918, a trip to Hartville meant access to gambling, prostitution, and plenty of bars. In Sunrise, all homes were built and maintained by the company. One new employee moved into a house, but was told it was haunted, and that the only way to get rid of the spirit was to draw a picture of the ghost on the wall and drill a hole into it. So he did. Even though workers considered the housing quality better in Sunrise, some would seek to buy a house in Hartville or elsewhere. Eventually, the arrival of the automobile made it practical to own a home in nearby Guernsey or even towns further away like Wheatland and Torrington, while commuting to Sunrise for work. This would eventually lead to the decline of Sunrise as a company town, but not to the mining operation itself, that kept over 400 employees in its better years. And who were these people living in this company town, mining the ore and attending the dances? Most of the residents and workers in Sunrise were immigrants. By 1902, there were 205 employees of CF&I, 55 of which were Americans, and the rest made up of Italians, Greeks, Irish, Germans, French, Austrians, and one Scot, though it is not known if it was the one true Scot. To help find employees, CF&I used a padrone system, an Italian word that means boss or manager. A padrone was a middleman who would use their network to bring in workers. The first Greek immigrants spread the word back home to friends and relatives to come to Wyoming for work. The Greek community maintained what was called a Socrates Society to provide benefits for the victims of sickness and death, including helping to pay wages for fellow Greeks who were too sick to work. Italians had a similar mutual benefit society called the Dante Alighieri Society. Eventually, some Italian and Greek workers left the mine to establish their own businesses in Hartville, such as grocery stores, bakeries, coffee houses, and taverns. But not all immigrants would stay, such as many Japanese and Lebanese workers who would often move on after a few years of work. As part of their community effort, CF&I encouraged educational opportunities for its employees, including night schools in English and Americanization classes to help immigrants obtain American citizenship. Thanks to all the buildings being constructed by one company, this cultural footprint is largely invisible in Sunrise today, but the lasting impact can be seen in the many families of Greek, Italian, and Lebanese heritage that still remains in the area today. Between 1900 and 1980, the Sunrise Mine produced over 40 million tons of iron ore. But what brought a mine here in the first place? Well, a gold rush in the Black Hills led to an influx of miners in the 1870s, and in 1880, there was a boom in copper that would lead to creating the town of Hartville. This copper boom led to interest in the Sunrise area, and from 1881 to 87, over 250 tons of copper were produced and hauled by mules and wagons to a smelter a few miles away in Fairbank. By 1887, the cost of producing copper rose while the market value dropped, and the copper rush was effectively over. This gave way to iron prospecting and a whole new way of life in Sunrise. Boasting 60% iron content, the hematite in Sunrise was found to be superior to other mines both foreign and domestic. And after leasing the claims and thoroughly surveying the land, Colorado Fuel and Iron would purchase Sunrise in 1904 for $500,000. Their first mining technique was a rather simple process known as strip mining, which used dynamite and black powder to blast the rock into smaller pieces. And then use a railroad-mounted steam shovel to scoop the ore and load it onto cars headed to the steel mill in Pueblo, Colorado. The entire operation only cost 15 cents a ton, and in 1901 was sending an average of 21,000 tons per month by rail to Pueblo, employing 175 workers. Strip mining was quite successful, and within a few years produced nearly 500,000 tons of iron ore, worth approximately $750,000. However, the strip mining method also created a deep pit that made it tougher and tougher to get rails out of the hole. To solve this problem, a relatively new technique known as the glory hole method was employed. This was a design that would use surface mining and blasting to let the iron ore fall into the pit, and then into mills, and loaded onto mine cars that would go into a hoisting shaft, allowing the ore to be lifted up from the deep pit. This is thought to be the first operation of its kind in the western United States. Of course, this would require a good amount of energy, so in 1904, a boiler house was built for creating steam-powered electricity to run tools like the steam shovel in the hoisting house, and it also heated commercial buildings like the YMCA and general store. The boiler house held 6 150-horsepower boilers, and not long after its construction, a spark from one of those boilers landed in a carload of black powder, blowing the roof off the building, leading to a new strategy of how to store explosives. By 1927, electricity would be brought in from the Guernsey Dam, eliminating the need for the boiler house. But the glory hole method would continue until 1941, when surface mining was discontinued and all ore was excavated entirely by underground block caving methods. Sunrise Mine was the main source of iron used at the CF&I plant in Pueblo, Colorado, from 1899 until World War II, when production was shared with the newly acquired mine in Cedar City, Utah. Sunrise remained a prominent iron source until its closing in 1980, making Sunrise an important part of the economy of Wyoming as well as Colorado. Sunrise, Wyoming has a rich history of mining that goes back thousands of years, and how we came to know this is a story in itself. In 1939, a man by the name of Wayne Powers was a teacher and a coach in Sunrise, and during his time there, he discovered some artifacts on a hillside above the railroad tracks in the town of Sunrise. But his findings would not come to light for almost 50 years, when in 1986, reclamation of the abandoned CF&I iron mine was taking place. Reclamation had progressed along the hillside right to the edge of the site where Powers had collected artifacts. And by sheer luck, Powers had returned to the area to attend a class reunion. When he saw that the reclamation work would soon destroy the site, he immediately notified the Wyoming state archaeologist, who was able to stop work in that area. It is a phenomenal fact that we had come within one day of losing a 13,000-year-old archaeological site, one of the most important sites in North America. In his honor, the site was named the Powers II site. Artifacts and features of the site reveal that more than 13,000 years ago, some of the earliest Americans were mining here for red ochre. A pigment known to be important to indigenous ancestors. Red ochre was used for ornamentation, rock art painting, preservative, and ritual contexts, and possibly for other purposes. The Powers 2 site is unique in that it is the only known Paleo-American red ochre mine in North America. And that it contains such a large number of artifacts, especially projectile points, in the context of an ancient mine. As such, it offers the opportunity to learn new things about people from the Paleo-American period. The Powers 2 site may be critical to understanding the very roots of human history in North America. The hematite mined from here may have been widely traded, and the discovery of a great number of projectile points are noteworthy as the people who used them could be some of the earliest inhabitants of North America. Normally, Paleo-Indian sites may only contain a handful of projectile points if you're lucky, but here in Sunrise, archaeologists have found over 100 projectile points. But the story becomes even more interesting when considering that many of the projectile points are of a type that appears to be new to archaeologists. A large number of artifacts in the site were made of a toolstone with which we were not familiar. Toolstone is a particular type of stone that was necessary in manufacturing stone tools. In exploring areas near the ochre mine, we discovered the source of that material. It is of a different geological age than other material found in the area. Also, while exploring the area in the terrace on the valley floor below the ochre mine, we discovered artifacts and deposits dated at 14,000 to 15,000 years ago. These are the oldest dated artifacts on the Western High Plains. Research in the area continues, and new discoveries are made every year.